Hello everyone and welcome to the video. And today we will be covering Reddit's cult encounters. I originally came up with this video idea when I came across this Reddit post. Have you been involved with a cult? What was your experience? And there is some very interesting responses. So that's what we'll be covering in today's video. Reddit cult encounters. And I'm very excited to get into these stories, but before we get into it, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the channel's goal to be at 250,000 subs by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe. And alright, anyways, now into the first story. I was married to a Scientologist. Obviously, I'm using a throwaway. Well, Scientology is weird. It's all-consuming, as most cults are. My ex-husband only knew and associated with people in Scientology. However, all his friends were actually very nice and really cool to me. I made a lot of friends through him. I never felt outwardly pressured to join Scientology, but the insidiousness was absolutely there. I'll get to that. Ex-husband was raised in it. You could say he was a second-generation Scientologist. His parents joined up back in the L. Ron Hubbard days, and they were in it. They both worked for the church as auditors. They were dirt poor. All of their money went to the church, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were so deep in debt. They had no health insurance and no money for anything except rent for their tiny, run-down apartment. That part made me the saddest. They were nice people. Now, I married him back when I was younger, more idealistic and willing to overlook major differences. I was a bit lost myself and really just looking to connect with anyone. I was always atheist, and actually really against organized religion, but he always assured me that Scientology was not something he was active in and that it wouldn't be a problem. He wasn't taking any courses all the time, we dated and were engaged, so I believed him that Scientology was more like his parents' thing than his. After we got engaged, he started telling me how a friend of his needs some help. She was training to become an auditor, that e-meter thing you hear about, and needed someone to practice on. I declined. He kept asking and insisted that it's just for her practice. It doesn't mean I'm doing Scientology, and that it would mean a lot to him. So I did it. Okay, what a silly experience. Honestly, it's just really silly. You sit in a room with the auditor, hold these cans. Let me tell you, the rigmarole they use to get the cans set right up so they pick you up your wavelengths or whatever they call it is laughable. Lotion on the hands, squeeze the cans. That didn't work? Go for a walk, drink some water, lotion again, squeeze the stupid cans, all this over and over, until something on the auditor's end says it's all working now, and then you're good to go. I lied through the whole thing. They acted like I made some amazing breakthroughs. I got a floating needle, and then that was it. However, I was then called over and over again to come back in. What the hell? I thought this was a one-time thing to help this chick out. Nope, they were all over me. They wanted 3-hour sessions, days in a row, on weekdays. No wonder Scientologists are all poor as shit. They want you in constantly during work days. I became so disagreeable to them that they actually gave up calling me to get me in. I guess they figured me being married to one was enough to eventually get me. The Scientologists on the lower portion of the bridge tend to know nothing about the Xenu stuff. I asked them and they acted like they've never heard of it. I guess you don't get to read that tech till way later, a few 100,000 deep. The overriding insidiousness I saw was the learned ability to scam people. I witnessed a Scientologist-owned business get taken down by the feds for frauding their clients. The reason I divorced him was because he stole a large sum of money from my account that was not to be touched. It just vanished and he had nothing to say for it. He opened 2 credit cards in my name and maxed them. He put me into financial ruin. It was a disaster. Sorry if this was rambling and all over the place. It's been a number of years since, and I haven't really talked about it in a while. My mom almost got involved with one when I was little. She met this elderly couple who were a part of the church and would come over every Thursday and Friday to say a prayer, talk about God, and read the Bible with my mom. I thought it was nice because my mom is a big Christian, so I thought it was nice she finally had someone to talk to. But then things started getting odd. They started getting more aggressive, so to say. My mom told me one day that the man in the couple was feeling something was not right in our household. He never said what he meant until a week later. He said my dad and I were not right with God and were too worldly, and that my mom should leave us. She didn't really let this get to her though, mainly because I think she was lonely. They then started asking for money or a seed. We were super broke at the time, but my mom still gave them somewhere between $5 to $10 a week. But then it got really, really weird. I finally met them one day because I was stuck home from school due to fake being sick. My mom suggested I meet them, and I did. They started doing that thing where one person will be praying really loudly and telling the devil off while the other one was behind me. Next thing you know, she's poking my forehead. I didn't know what she was doing, so I asked her to please stop. She kept going until my mom made her stop. The lady said I am too worldly and that my time will be soon. Okay, here's how I know they were a cult. Remember how I said they suggested my mom leave? They tried to make her leave one day, saying she could live with them, that they have a big house with their church on the property, and a few other members stay there too. My mom obviously said no, but they were not going to have it. They basically tried to mentally force my mom into going. She said it worked a little, but she knew what was right. She called the police, and the police made them get off the property while they screamed, yelling, "Have fun burning in hell," and other like terms. 2 years passed, and I was watching the news with my mom when, wouldn't you know it, the couple were on the news. They were charged with attempted kidnapping of another family's 2 kids. Yup. I was born and raised in a cult as well. Left the week before I turned 18. I don't particularly want to name it, as though not well known. It can definitely be Googled. And I've been hiding this part of my life too long to be able to open up about it now. A lot of what I read in this post or in the reply sounds familiar. Praying, fasting, guilt, prophecy, end times, guilt, isolation, communal living, guilt, thieving, self-loathing, and guilt. A big difference between the OP's experience and the one I was raised in is that S-word was highly encouraged, and that's putting it mildly. Enforced is not the right word, but it's the first one that comes to mind. In my opinion, second-generation cult kids have the absolute worst. We didn't ask for it. We literally didn't know any better. That was our normal. By the time second-generation kids come around, the cult is still new enough that later generations haven't been able to mellow it out either, and small enough that horrible practices and abuse are able to pass under the radar. Abuse was so much a part of my life. Physical, S-word, mental, you name it. That's when I left and started socializing with regular folks. I couldn't process what real socializing, dating, or an active S life really is. I couldn't understand. Couldn't believe it, couldn't accept it. I have been locked in rooms for 3 days and nights to fast and pray. I've been denied contact with other humans for weeks or even months to get closer to God. I was given to men by request. I was once held down by 4 men while a group of maybe a dozen men exorcised me. They believed I was possessed by a demon because of my inability to be like them, to get with the program. I was spanked, beaten, and whipped most of my life. Simply put, I was terrified my entire childhood. I lived every second of my life in fear. Anyway, all this to say, I absolutely understand you and feel for you. And anyone else who has suffered this, and I wish I had advice on how to recover, move on, be free of it. Just remember that you are free of it. They have no power over you anymore. Always remember that and enjoy every damn breath of air you get twice as much as you should, simply because it's a free breath. Good luck. And in case you were wondering, no, I'm absolutely not religious in any way, shape, or form. I believe religion is a cancer. No offense is intended. I was raised without ever going to church. The only experience I had with religion was being told about the Christian God and that we are apparently Methodists. I had no idea what church was supposed to be like. I joined a non-denominational youth group when I was 12. It's a national group, but this particular church hosting it was batshit crazy. The shirts we wore to group were all cotton because mixing fibers is a sin. They would take the girls aside and tell us that accidentally showing your bra straps was tempting the boys into R word. Grown women were encouraged not to work in favor of being a wife and a mother. And birth control was considered a word. The fun videos we watched were Ken Ham lectures on, as he called it, evolution. and they were trying to begin running a Pray the Gay Away camp. I finally left at 14 when the church leaders took me aside and told me that because I had a single mother and she didn't come to the church, I was surely hellbound. To save my soul, they were going to find my adoptive parents in the congregation, so I would need to tell the police my mom was abusing me so I would be free to adopt. I never went back, but even as crazy as they weren't even the worst group in town. I was born and raised in a cult and considered myself a member up until I left my parents' home at the age of 18. The group I was associated with is not well known, but the effects on the members are tragic and undeniable. We were literally brainwashed. We had weekly services with a set program, 3 hymns, prayer, ceremony, hymn, announcements, main message, hymn, and prayer. It never altered from that layout. As well, the messages we would hear were often videotaped sermons from maybe 5 main people at headquarters. The topics were extremely narrow: prophecy, the end is coming, self-improvement, all of you suck and you should hate yourselves, setting ourselves apart, don't talk to worldly people, they will taint you. There were many ways in which we were indirectly encouraged to harm ourselves. Many people looked down upon modern medicine and felt that using it was a way of turning away from God, slapping him in the face, making it clear he wasn't needed. I personally know people who died for their faith, waiting for God to heal them. On the other hand, when any of the main leaders fell ill, they were immediately rushed off to receive medical care. They controlled their diet. We pretty much were kosher, though they denied all influence or association from or with Jewish people. There were annual days of fasting, and whenever the leader would scare up enough drama within the members, they would declare a church-wide fast so we could all get closer to God and resolve our issues. We fasted when the church's income was said to be dropping. We fasted when leaders were ill. We fasted when people died. We had our own personal fast for the hell of it, or when we felt especially guilty and out of touch with God. Parents were encouraged to get their children involved as young as possible. My parents told me I started observing the annual fast when I was 3 years old. I remember one year when my brother was 2 or 3. At one point during the day, he just broke down sobbing because he was so thirsty. Oh yeah, we abstained from food and drink. We got obscenely dehydrated. Every time. Looking back, I just don't understand how a parent can behave that way. They were so sex negative. I can't even describe. We spent so much time and energy frantically thinking I can't think about sex that it was all we thought about. It was evil, dirty, and wrong. It would hurt if we weren't married. I literally built up so much fear over it that when I did finally have S-word as an unmarried adult, I had developed vaginismus, a sexual pain condition. The cause is often psychological, in my case, being so afraid of it hurting, that it hurt, which further fed into my fear. There was actually an entire message once where one of the leaders took on the subject, "Are we a cult?" And he actually went through a checklist for us. His conclusion that we were a cult, but that it was a good thing. We should be proud, only not. Pride is a sin. We should be pleased. You had to be baptized before a minister would marry you. You couldn't be baptized and marry someone else who wasn't. You couldn't marry outside the church. Some ministers wouldn't baptize you if they thought your only incentive was to get married. There were rampant cases of SA from the leadership, but we were always too fearful to report it. Always taught that it must have, in some way, been our fault. Traditional gender roles were enforced, i.e., women stay home, pop out babies, cook, and clean. Men were to work and support the homes. Having children, and lots of them, was strongly encouraged. Be fruitful and multiply, and all that shit. Adoption was frowned upon, even for those who were unable to have their own children. So many families were living in poverty because there were just too many children to take care of. God forbid that any of them have a medical condition that required constant treatment. We were robbed on a regular basis. They called it tithing. Not only did we give 10% of our entire income, but we were also to set a second 10% aside to be used as a 7-day religious confrontation of sorts every year. And on every third year, we would give an additional 10% to the church. Imagine losing 20% of your income every year and 30% every third year. Imagine being poor to begin with. Imagine being told you are poor because you have been literally stealing from God by not diligently paying your tithes. I could go on forever. There is so much. I want to try to be concise and still give a proper breakdown of my time growing up in a cult. I'm going to start by breaking down the ideology. Second coming of Christ. They believe the second coming is and was alive. He was a Korean man who went by the name Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He was given the mission by Jesus in a vision when he was 16 years old on a mountaintop, and it is his purpose to create an example of the ideal family, so all may shape their families in its likeness and create an ideal world. Restoration of the fall. Jesus forgives your sins, but what about restoring humanity to what it was before the fall by paying spiritual indemnities and cleansing humanity of those sins in the first place? Their idea of an indemnity is almost like paying karma forward. You can put yourself through misery to either pay for your past mistakes of humanity or to ensure good things will happen in the future. You can pay indemnity by, number 1, living in a van for years and years on one of their task forces, fundraising by selling candles or wind chimes, sometimes more than 14 hours a day, getting an arranged marriage after abstaining from absolutely any contact with the opposite sex all your life by the Reverend himself or now your parents, thereby overcoming the temptation of the fall by denying your desires and obeying the church completely. Actually, this is the most important aspect of the church, that you get matched and blessed, their word for marriage. It is the only thing that will eventually restore humanity. 3. Converting other members. 4. Doing hundreds of thousands of bows to a picture of Reverend Moon every night for X amount of days. 5. Taking cold showers every day for X days. 6. Fasting. You can drink water for a providential number of days, either 3, 7, 21, or 40. Note, you must do a 7-day fast before you get to get married. 7. Giving money offerings to the church. The church also started changing for ancestor liberation in the last couple decades. Just like old school Catholics, you pay to have your dear old granddad hoisted out of the pits of hell. Since the church is Korean, they have deep resentment towards the Japanese, and ancestor liberation can be thousands of dollars per person liberated. For Americans, it was a little over 100, I think. 8. Beat yourself to repetitive chants at an approved spirit cleansing event. 9. Or basically denying yourself of any human comfort or need for some time. Some do sleep deprivation conditions. There's a lot else, but I can't keep going. Growing up in the church, there are countless strange rituals in the church. Like on your birthday, you and your whole family has to get up at 5 a.m., go to your altar of the Reverend Moon, say a prayer, and offer food. When the ritual is almost over, the birthday kid usually has to take the food and offer some to each of the family members, and you always leave some on the altar. There are countless stories told to the second generation of members who left the church and immediately got hit by a bus or became prostitutes and died of ODing or committed S-word out of guilt. Koreans. Korea in the church is seen as the New Jerusalem, Koreans being the new chosen people. Every leader in the church is a Korean, despite the religion's heavy unification of world cultures and religions overtones. Koreans often were only matched to other Koreans. None of Moon's kids were allowed to marry anyone other than a Korean. Japanese members have always been the church's cash cows, guilting them into paying more in tithing and overcharging them for everything. Americans got their fair share of that too. The church often comes up with a new ceremony like a holy wine ceremony, while drinking the new blessed wine, usually juice, will heal you of all your sins. That, of course, you have to pay big money to get into. Sometimes they just make a big plea for extra money, like their total life offering, which was something like if you paid the church $16,000, you would never have to pay them for anything again, which was a lie. Some members took out second mortgages on their homes to pay these offerings. My wrists are seriously hurting from typing this much, so I'll leave some space for questions. I haven't even made a dent in the beliefs, rituals, or culture of the church yet. I will say, in response to people in this thread who ask how someone could fall for this and how people can stay in it for so long, cults like this never approach it like, hey, a Korean guy is the Messiah. You want to join? They take you through steps, almost like Scientology, but not so clearly defined. The Unification Church was going around in America in the 70s preaching for true love and family values. Stuff many people, especially people with Christian backgrounds, can get behind. The church does have heavy Christian influence. So much of the language is the same. But they'll start discussing these things with you, like the evils in the world. If Jesus restored the world, then why would there need to be a second coming? We should prepare ourselves for the next Messiah. A Messiah is exactly what we need. How else can we right the wrongs of this world? Once you get going on that, you can just pump them with all the same religious feel-good stuff. God is our Father. God is watching out for you. He wants the best for you. God hurts when you don't do what's right. And eventually, God becomes some kind of emotionally sensitive dude you have to coddle and take care of. Then once your members are pumped, they're living in vans, they're trying to recruit other people, that's when you start with the deeper shit. You know, the Messiah is here. The tension has been building to this moment for literally years. The members are overjoyed and can't wait to do anything this guy says so they can be like Jesus' first disciples. No one thinks they're a victim. They think they're literally saving the world. It appealed to a lot of people who were raised Christian but were dissatisfied with the contradictions or shortcomings of their parents' religion. When I was in my early teens, my parents had this midlife crisis. They were always religious, but they encountered this group that took it to a whole nother level. Certain facets of their faith were somewhat neglected and their marriage wasn't very stable at this time, so they grasped onto this and took us along for the ride. It all started out with a summer camp. Something innocent sounding enough. There were about 35 other boys going to it from all over the country. I would later realize this summer camp wasn't really about swimming, playing games or sports, going on day trips to places like Niagara Falls or Washington, D.C. It was the first stage of their recruitment to join. Most of the children there were from large families that were intimately familiar with the group. A lot of their older or younger brothers were attending the camp. Most of them had gone for years because the purpose of the program was to draw in boys to their boarding school. In fact, the camp took place at the boarding school campus. After the summer program was over, my brother wanted to go there for high school instead of the local public school. I had really no desire to go to the public school after the absolutely horribly 8th grade year I had at the middle school next door. So that, coupled with the pressure of my parents and brother, had me going to the boarding school that September. Things started off decently. There wasn't much pressure, but it was a very religious school. Prayers several times a day. There was the option to go to church every morning, and the instruction was completely from their unique Catholic perspective in every way. I would attend this school for 3 years, 2 on, 1 off, in my graduate year. The school really served as the second stage of their organizational recruitment. Not everyone who attended joined, was expected to join, but those who showed enough fervor or interest were groomed to becoming full-time members. When I was 16, I knew full well I wasn't ever going to join. But my brother did. I'm not sure if he is gay or just never had that much luck with girls, but he decided to forego all that for the cause and join right after he completed high school. For the most part, I never really realized just how far out this organizational was until years later when I had a crisis in my own religious faith and became a non-believer and saw how they treated the most people who left the group over time. Most, if not all, who leave the group don't lose their faith, but there's a lot of ostracizing. While in the school, we did a lot of things with the rest of the group, including protesting campaigns for things we didn't fully understand, attended some of their Saturday meetings at their headquarters, events, conferences, marches, etc. Their methods were not extreme, but they fostered a severe us versus the world mentality. Rock music was satanic. Anyone who didn't embrace our version of belief and morals was a monster or horrible person. Everything was seen in black and white, and they couldn't comprehend how somebody could disagree on one thing with them yet agree in many other things. At their meetings, they did a lot of patting themselves on the back by talking of their campaigns and the supposed success of them, how they were going to bring the world back to order, which according to them meant their version of Catholicism. Most of them didn't even like the Pope at the time because he wasn't fire and brimstone enough. Speaking of that, a lesser talked about subject publicly, but strongly believed and discussed privately, was the world was going to enter the period of death, destruction, and end times that would last many years. Even they prepared for it in some ways by building a sort of bomb shelter in one of the buildings. This would then be followed by a 1,000-year reign of Mary, in which they would lead the world back to religion, and it would be happy times and glory to be had for all. My brother even bought into this stuff a lot when he was younger, mocking me for my interest in technology because it wasn't going to do you any good when the nukes fall and there's no electricity. This was probably just a harmless tease on his part, but it always irritated me that he was actually thought living like a hermit was the best, most productive use of our lives. Or that foregoing technology was wise because you might have to live without it at some point. As it is, my parents still like this group. I see my brother once, maybe twice a year, and I don't really communicate with anyone there anymore. For years, though, my brother didn't want to visit us. He was always terrible about planning it and acted like it wasn't important. It did bother my parents that he had separated himself from us to such an extent. But now that they are more religious than ever, they see it as a good thing he's doing there. I'm surprised there aren't more former Children of God or the Family International babies posting on this thread. I was born and raised in the COG or TFI, and I'm convinced it is or was one of the most detrimental cults out there because of the way their doctrines were weaved into every tiny area of people's lives. Everything was dictated by the leadership and controlled by peer pressure. It was a communal cult. Hive mentality was rampant. The type of food you ate, the way you dressed, who you lived with, the education you received, the movies you watched, the music you listened to, who you had sex with, who you married. Everything was controlled. There was absolutely no real free will allowed, and very minimal contact with the outside world happened, except if you were asking people for money or trying to convert them to Christianity/the cult. I left when I was in my early 20s, and it's only been a few years since then, so I'm still trying to unlearn a lot of things. I decided to go to college and get an education, and I'm so miserable because basic things like how to study for an exam or how to interact with your professor are completely foreign concepts to me. I didn't find out until college that I'm pretty good at science and math, subjects that were highly discouraged in the group, or if taught at all were either very simplistic. Math only went up to basic algebra if you were lucky, or taught with such a religious or creationist spin that it's unrecognizable as science. Someone actually posted excerpts from the biology textbook I had in high school here on Reddit a while ago, and everyone was commenting, haha, those are all lies and not real science. And I'm like, well, fuck. I like to imagine that if I had regular schooling when I was younger, maybe I could have been an engineer or an astronaut or something awesome. People are probably going to counter that statement with a, it's never too late to try, platitude. I'd like to say, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Forget dating. I have more sexual knowledge and experience under my belt than most people my age, and I don't have a clue what normal dating looks like. Sex is synonymous with intimacy. It's synonymous with control. I'm terrified of getting into a relationship because I know that it would be so ridiculously easy for someone to abuse their power over me. When you're raised to always say yes, you have no idea what a struggle it is to say no. When people find out about this cult thing, that usually gets focused on the most is the sex aspect of it. It was literally a sex cult. But for me, the worst part of it is having no frame of reference for connecting with other people outside the group. I can forget the bad things that happened and just get on with my life, but it's difficult knowing how to make friends and build a life outside of TFI. I just don't get most of what people talk about. I've only got a few years of movies, music, pop culture history in my brain, and can't really relate to how other people act or react to things. I didn't have any of those normal experiences like high school, dating, going to prom, etc. My best friends are former TFI people because I can't seem to make real friends out here in the great wide jungle of the world. I wonder how I will ever be able to get close to people when they will never be able to comprehend the experiences I've gone through. And at the same time, I can't relate to their experiences either. Real life things that most people take for granted, like graduating college, buying a house, having a successful job, etc., seem like fairy tales to me because nobody in my life growing up did those things. I don't have anybody who can give me advice on how to accomplish those normal life tasks because nobody I grew up with or our parents did any of those things. I feel pretty lost. I'm still picking pieces of this cult out of my identity, and it's exhausting. Edit. Just wanted to add a random artifact from my upbringing. I went to see Hunger Games: Catching Fire recently, and I broke down crying in the middle of it because I had a sudden realization that I grew up believing that the sort of apocalyptic depressing scenario played out in the Hunger Games was an inevitable outcome in the future. Not the actual Hunger Games, obviously, but the extreme government control, oppression of the people, dire social circumstances, etc. It made me feel very alone in that moment, sitting with the knowledge that I was viewing the very thing my childhood nightmares were made of, and knowing that nobody around me could possibly comprehend the reason for my tears. Throwaway because only a handful of people closest to me know this happened. It's very difficult for me to talk about, but maybe it's time. Note, I'm 27 now, and this all happened when I was 18 and 19. I wasn't raised in church. My parents grew up with very religious parents and didn't want to force anything on us. That being said, in high school, I got very curious about God, religion, etc. I started dating a guy when I was in 9th grade, who took me to church with him. He was a Southern Baptist, so I kept going. We broke up, but that's important because that was my first experience with the church. I just wanted to do the right thing. This isn't what the story's about, it's just a little background. Fast forward to my senior year. I started dating a guy in my grade. He was always popular and pretty mysterious. Everyone knew he was religious, but didn't know what kind. They knew because his mom would attend our choir concerts always wearing long skirts, no jewelry or makeup, and had her hair in a bun. His best friend didn't even know what church he had went to, but told me that they didn't have a TV and weren't allowed to watch movies. I was very nervous to ask him what church he went to, even though we were dating and I figured after 3 months I should know. I had asked him a few times to go with me to the Baptist church, but he always declined. Finally, I got up the courage. I asked him what church he went to, and he only replied with, "You should see for yourself." I was excited. I get to be part of it and his life. He invited me to his church. I went out and bought a long skirt and threw my hair up. I figured I should be respectful and dress like his mother. He picked me up that following Wednesday evening and drove me to the meeting. It was at a Holiday Inn conference room. Everyone was very old except for me, my boyfriend, his younger brother, and 2 toddlers. The meeting, that's what they called it, was run by 2 very elderly women from Ireland. Pretty sure it was Ireland. I could barely understand them, but the Bibles they used were normal Bibles, so I didn't feel too uncomfortable. They had a hymnal, and they just said hymns on the front. Everyone sang a cappella. There were never instruments. It was a very strange evening, but because they used a typical Bible, I figured it was fine. I eventually stopped attending the Baptist church I was part of and went strictly to my boyfriend's meetings. Wednesdays were held at the Holiday Inn, and Sundays were held in various friends' houses. Every member was called a friend. The meetings weren't huge, maybe 10 to 20 people. Each fall and spring they held conventions. They would be held on someone's farm and would be every friend in the state and sometimes a few surrounding states. Those were very, very big. We would stay in quarters and listen to people speak about the Bible. You also had a chance to stand up and read a verse that meant something to you. This all happened very slowly and over the course of 2 years or so. I must have been obsessed with just trying to do the right thing and follow Jesus because I didn't notice that I was being brainwashed. He took my virginity. I ended up living with him. I have no idea to this day how that transition even happened or if my parents wondered where I was. My parents were in the middle of a messy divorce and honestly probably didn't notice I was gone. My boyfriend's mom didn't believe in using hospitals or doctors and took a holistic approach to her family's and my health. She had me on different vitamins every day of the week. I was already very skinny, but over time lost even more weight. I probably got down to 80 or 90 pounds. She also had me iodine drops under my tongue every day. This all led me to being severely underweight, and I had stopped sleeping almost completely. I think the doctors said it was all the vitamin B12 in my system. While in a hazy state of mind, I ended up getting baptized in a lake at one of the conventions. Shortly thereafter, when we went home, I started having panic attacks. Everything from this time is such a blur to me. Such a blur. I eventually had one big panic attack that threw me over the edge. I had a complete mental breakdown. I remember a few things very vividly. I tried to read the Bible to calm down and I couldn't read anymore. Everything was just shapes and blobs. This led to more crying. My dad remarried 2 weeks after the divorce and married a woman named Nikki. I was convinced they were both Satan because of this. I tried to jump off a very high hill near the house I was staying at. I would have, at the very least, broken many bones, if not died. I thought I was already dead and was convinced their house was a coffin, and they were burying me outside and my soul was overhearing it all. I guess they realized that something was wrong and probably didn't want to be liable because they found my dad's number and told him to come get me. I fought going and cried and screamed, but my dad took me back to his house. I didn't sleep that night again and thought his house was the Twin Towers and I was stuck inside as they were falling down. I started seeing small rainbows everywhere. My brain was fucked, you guys. The next day, my dad and stepmom took me to the behavioral mental hospital. I remember it was the day Steve Irwin died because my dad told me in the waiting room, and I thought for sure that he murdered Steve Irwin, and that's how he knew he was dead. But it was on the news in the waiting room. Either way, I stayed in an acute wing of the hospital for 2 weeks. They took my vitals several times a day and night. I had to go to group therapy sessions and drink Ensure all day until I was finally up to a healthy weight. That man and his family fucked me up. I hope I never see them again. It's almost 10 years later, and I have nightmares about them still. I had one last night, actually. They're mostly just present in the dream. I had the courage to finally try and Google the name of the cult. It took some digging, but they're called 2x2s. Sorry this was so long. So much happened to me. This is just all I can remember. And alright, that wraps up Reddit cult encounters. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Would you like to see more? Would you like to see something different? I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and just let me know what you think. What you want to see in the future or different. Anyways, thank you for watching to the end of the video. It means a lot. And make sure you remember to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps out the channel a lot. And thank you for watching again. And yeah, anyways, until next time, see ya.